Hello and welcome to a lecture on the lymphatic system. This is the first part of chapter 22 with M.Hook. Here we have an animation that you can click on when you're in PowerPoint mode. First, let's look at the functions of the lymphatic system. First, drain interstitial fluid. So what does that mean? Well, whenever you have blood traveling through your vessels and it goes to the capillaries to exchange nutrients and wastes, it also loses a lot of fluid there. And if we don't return that fluid back to our blood volume will drop. So it's important for us to take that extra fluid around the cells and return it back into your blood. Second, transport dietary fats. So when we absorb fat from our digestive tract and our small intestine, we bring it into the body through our lymphatic system. And third, it acts as a structure that houses a lot of our immune cells. So that's where we're going to have a lot of our primary immune functions occurring. Okay, what are the parts? First, lymphatic vessels. From the tissues, you're going to have vessels that lead back towards the heart, bringing that fluid and returning it to blood flow right before the superior vena cava. Next, all the fluid inside those vessels are lymph. And then lymph nodes are points along the lymphatic vessels where lymph gets filtered. So the fluid moves through the vessels and then goes to the lymph nodes where it gets filtered and cleaned before we return it back into the blood. Now let's look at the organs. Your lymphatic tissue provides a structural basis for the immune system. So what that means is that it's a place where a lot of our immune cells will be housed. So you've got lots of reticular fibers in there, and sitting on there you'll have different phagocytic cells, macrophages mostly, and then lymphocytes, both B cells and T cells that we'll look at very in depth in the immune system. So the large organs, spleen, thymus, tonsils, and then you've got other lymphoid tissues within different organs that we'll look at. The first part of your lymphatic system is the lymphatic vessels. So you'll find those starting right around the capillaries. And what they'll do is you'll lose fluid proteins into this space, and they'll get picked up into the lymph vessels and then move back towards the heart. And you return over 3 liters of fluid a day. There's 5 liters of blood in your body, approximately 4 to 5. So that's a very important amount of water. Okay, and then once the water, the fluid, the water, proteins in it, once it comes into the lymphatic system, into those vessels, it's called lymph. Lymph vessels are a bit different than blood vessels. Lymph has a one-way flow. So what that means is it goes from our tissues back towards the heart, and that's it. There's no circuit. It's just unidirectional. We pick up the fluid around our cells and the interstitial fluid, return it to our heart. It's done. So it starts out in capillaries. You'll find those around our blood capillaries. As you have capillaries merging together, the vessels get larger. They become collecting lymphatic vessels. From there, you've got larger vessels called trunks, and the largest you've got 2 are ducts. Okay, we'll start by looking at lymphatic capillaries. They're kind of like blood capillaries. They've got the same single layer of endothelial cells, just like our capillaries, but they just start. There's no preceding vessels leading up to it. And they've got what are called mini valves, and we'll look at that in a picture, where the cells lap over each other part of the way, and when fluid's on the inside, it can't come out. It prevents fluid from flowing from the lymph vessels out again. And you've got that happening because they're anchored by collagen fibers. You've got lymphatic capillaries all over your body, except bone, teeth, bone marrow, and your central nervous system. There are specialized lymph capillaries in your intestinal mucosa. Those are the ones that pick up fat and bring it into the body. And here they have a different name. For the capillaries, they're lacteals, and as well as the lymph. So instead of it just having lymph, it's chyle, and it'll look more of a milky white to yellow coloration because of the fat inside there. You can see these are the villi inside of our small intestine, for example. And you've got your blood capillaries there, and then there's the lacteal, and that'll connect up and head towards the heart. This is the beginning of a lymphatic capillary. Here's the collagen fibers, and there's how the flaps overlap. So when there's high pressure outside, fluid gets pushed in. It can squeeze through those spaces. But once this starts to get full, it pushes back on there, and it can't come back out again. So these mini valves prevent backflow. So you've got capillaries coming together, and then you've got collecting vessels. They're very similar to veins. Their walls are a little bit more thinner, and they've got more valves. That makes sense that they would have more valves because the pressure in there is going to be very low. And so they'll need a lot of valves to keep things moving forward. And they also anastomose more frequently, so they have alternate routes they can take, coming back together. Okay. Lymphatic capillaries, collecting vessels, and then lymphatic trunks. Once you've got large collecting vessels coming together, they form trunks. So you've got paired lumbar, bronchiomediastinal, subclavian jugular, and then just a single intestinal tract coming up. Those trunks continue up, and then they become ducts. There are two large lymphatic ducts, the right lymphatic duct and the left lymphatic duct, or the thoracic duct. So your right lymphatic duct drains your right arm, right upper portion of your body. The left, or thoracic duct, drains everything else. So everything from your inferior extremities comes up, merges into the intestinal trunk, and then up, and comes in on the left side. I like to think about ducks are bigger than trunks because I imagine a really large, silly duck. It's silly. Okay. So there's a nice view looking at the different parts. Another important feature is the cisterna chyli. We haven't talked about that. That's in the intestinal trunk. That's a large sac-like structure that everything goes into before it goes up. You can see lots of lymph nodes along the way, all these different branches. And you can see everything coming in right before we return to the right atrium of the heart. Okay. So this is a really nice view where we've got our right and thoracic ducts draining in. And then this is our blood flow. Superior vena cava into the right atrium. So first, the fluid starts out as interstitial fluid in the body tissues. Then it moves into the lymphatic capillaries, through those to the collecting vessels, to the trunks, ducts, and then comes in at the subclavian veins and goes into the vena cava. So questions? Take a second here to pause. Go over the answers. Okay. We talked a little bit about the lymph vessels look a lot like veins, and they're really low pressure. So how do we get the lymph to return back up towards the heart? First, just like veins, we've got the milking action of skeletal muscle. So there, when you contract your muscle, that pushes pressure on the vessels and keeps fluid moving up because we have the valves that can't go back. You've also got pressure changes in your thoracic cavity. As you breathe, you change the pressure to allow air to come in or out, and that can put pressure on those vessels. And here they're so sensitive, even arteries nearby pulsing can put pressure on there to help move lymph back. They do have some smooth muscle in their walls, but not a lot. What types of cells do you see? Lymphatic tissue has lots of lymphocytes. All our blood cells start in the red bone marrow. Lymphocytes are special in that once they leave the red bone marrow, they go into the blood, and they can go into lymphatic tissue and return to the blood. All the other cells, if they leave blood flow, they're gone. They're in the tissue where they go to. That's their final target. Lymphocytes move through. And once they mature, you've got two types of lymphocytes, T cells and B cells. They're going to be important for our immune functions. T cells are going to coordinate the immune response, whereas B cells are going to make plasma cells, which make antibodies. So both of those cells help protect against antigens. Antigens are antibody generators. Anything that's foreign, we want to start an immune response. So anything that has different sorts of proteins on the outside, sugars, like glycolipids, we can make antibodies against. So T cells, they manage the immune response. You've got a couple different types, and they're both going to be important to help all the other cells work efficiently. And then you've got some T cells that are cytotoxic, and they go in and look at our cells and see what's been altered, and they destroy infected cells. B cells make plasma cells, which make antibodies. So we saw antibodies on the last slide. They're these Y-shaped structures here, and they've got these receptor sites that can bind to the very specific molecules that they match up with. And when they do that, they can mark this cell, like the bacteria. They mark it so that our other immune cells, like the phagocytes that come in and eat things, can bind to it, and they can also sometimes inactivate the cell for a bit. Other cells, macrophages. So monocytes, once they leave the blood, they become macrophages. They mature and they stay in that tissue. And then dendritic cells. Dendritic cells are found in our epithelial layers, like our skin, and in connective tissue. And they're going to be important for different parts of our immune response too. Once they find antigens, what they do is they're called antigen presenting cells. So once they find an antigen, like let's say they take in a bacteria, what they do is they take that bacteria, they break it down, and they put parts that they broke down on their cell membrane. Then they move over into the lymphatic tissue and they show it to T cells. And they say, hey, this is what I found. You need to mount an immune response. So here's some reticular connective tissue where you've got all these reticular fibers and you've got different cells stationed on there. That's where you're finding the lymphocytes, macrophages. Okay, so lymphatic tissue is a place where we can have that reticular fibers, where we have the immune cells. They also provide a proliferation site. What proliferation means is a place where the cells can divide, and once specific B cells and T cells get activated, they go through multiple divisions so that those cells that are active can fight different immune responses. And it acts as a surveillance vantage point. So what that means is if you've got a cop car that's driving along in traffic, it can only look at the cars around it to see what's happening. So it doesn't get to see very many cars. But if you've got a cop pulled over on the side of the road, they see all the cars going past. So they're able to see a lot more. Here you'll have macrophages, lymphocytes sitting on that reticular fiber watching everything go by, watching that fluid move through so they can see and look for anything foreign. There's two types of tissue, diffuse lymphoid tissue, just spread out, and then lymphatic follicles. We'll look at those. Okay. So you've got diffuse lymphoid tissue in pretty much all of your organs. You've got spaces where you've got lymphocytes, macrophages. Lymphoid follicles are these dense, packed areas with lots of lymph cells and those reticular fibers. So like here you can see in this picture, where's my mouse? Okay. Like the dark purple circles are lymphatic follicles. The middle of these are called germinal centers. Inside the germinal centers, that's where B cells proliferate. Once a B cell gets activated, it clones itself multiple